And hello, and welcome back to SlimDevOps Live. Hello, Pete.
Hey, Martin. How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. So this is episode 39 of SlimDevOps Live. This was originally streamed on twitch.tv/SlimDevOps. So if you want to join those sessions interactively and you're watching this on YouTube, you can head over there and give us a follow there. So, Pete, you're back from New York, I assume?
Yes, but the traveling band continues. I'm actually in downtown Boston today. We have this awesome little co-working space that one of our kind of investor partners makes available to us. And we have our growth team in person for the first time ever. So, Lindsay and Grace are here with me, and we're doing some brainstorming and coming up with some fun tweets and all that kind of good stuff, writing some good content and all that. So yeah, a little bit of an impromptu stream from my side, but should be good. Yeah. What have you been up to?
What have I been up to? Well, so I've been recording my voice. So I'll put a link in the Twitch chat, and for anyone that's watching this after the fact on YouTube, you will be able to find this video on our YouTube channel as well, and I'll also put it in Discord. So I'll put that in our Discord channel a little bit later. But we've put together everything you need to know about container optimization and securing containers and what we do at Slim.AI in comfortably under 2 minutes. So you were just mentioning Lindsay and Grace there, and also Sam did some fantastic animations to which I spoke some words, but I think the animations are the winning bit of work there. They look absolutely fantastic. So yeah,
well, we do know that the British accent is the best for the voiceover. It conveys that authority and that sense of voice. And for us Americans, just hearing somebody with a British accent, that just means we immediately believe you. So yeah, it's really great.
I thought the way it worked was if it was an English accent, we were the evil villain of the piece.
It's only in certain circumstances, But yeah, that does happen too.
I see. Well, okay, so you're in Boston, but somewhere else, and you've got a topic you want to dig into today. So what are we going to be talking about?
Yeah, so we've been some exciting news. Last week that I personally was excited about is that Docker announced a partnership with Anchor company that works in kind of the DevSecOps kind of supply chain security space, similar to ourselves. And they have an open source project called Syft that can produce an SBOM from a container. And Docker announced that they've integrated this Syft open source project into the Docker command line. And so, yeah, I thought it was kind of a cool opportunity to kind of take a look at that and compare it to DockerSlim XRAYS. Okay. And I've actually been looking at, I've been working with Syft for quite some time. I think it's a really, really cool project. Mm-hmm. And, I've been trying to get to know SBOMs better and understand what what their value is, why you would generate them and all of that kind of stuff. And so, it just seemed like a good opportunity with that news last week. And then, I've been doing a lot of work with the Syft SBOMs, and then a lot of work, obviously, with the DockerSlim XRAYS tool, which, to be clear, is not an SBOM tool, but is another sort of container analysis tool, and to do a little sort of compare and contrast on those. And I thought that would be kind of a cool thing to stream. And
excellent.
We have some vacations and some holidays coming up and stuff like that, so we're a little off cycle. But I said, hey, so I'm winging this one a little bit. I want to be totally clear.
They're always the best ones. They're always the best ones when we wing it a little bit. And although we're going to take a slightly different tack at this today, this is not a topic we're completely fresh to. As you say, you've been using Syft for a while. In fact, another video that I will share in our Discord, which you can find at the URL above my head, is a presentation we did with the Cloud Computing Foundation a back end of last year. And we went through securing, optimizing, and analyzing containers, and we used Syft and Grape alongside some other tools in order to sort of complete that. And we've also had Brendan O'Leary from GitLab on here who is something of an authority on SBOM, and he went into sort of the backstory as, you know, why this is a critical piece of analysis you need to do in sort of, you know, the modern container ecosystem world that we live in today. So you will find those videos on our YouTube channel. And what I think I'll do is put together a little package of links of all the SBOM related stuff that we've put together, because there are some other places as well where we've got into this. And I think you're going to sort of show some of the analysis we've done with that as well.
Yeah, I can definitely, I'll definitely dive into some of that. And I think, you know, another article, I didn't think about going into it today, but John wrote an article for the New Stack. Our CEO wrote an article for the New Stack about SBOM signing and slimming and sort of how those three things interplay together. And so that's another link that we can put out, and we'll retweet it again. But I think John wants to come on to Twitch at some point and talk in depth about that article. But that sort of, we'll touch on some of those topics today. But I thought today would be kind of cool to just, like, given the news from Syft and Docker, you know, given that we're going to be at DockerCon in 3 weeks, you know, we'll be talking a lot about our extension and a lot about, you know, some of the work that we've been doing on that side. You know, it'd be kind of cool to just sort of look at this partnership and look at SBOMs and then compare them to XRAY.
Yeah. So I'll just take a quick opportunity to welcome back some of our regulars. Hello, our podcast. Welcome back, Big Pod. And hello, Lindsay, who I think is probably sat in a room somewhere near you.
I think she might just be right over there. Yep.
first time chatter in our Twitch channel. So nice. Welcome one, welcome all. Right then. So where do we start?
Well, we can kind of bump over. I just have the news announcement up, and I was saying a little bit, you know, I don't want to misrepresent myself here. We're looking at an open source project that I haven't contributed to. I've just used and am kind of excited about. And Docker, obviously, this is a partnership between them. So I'm no SBOM expert. So if people have other ideas about SBOMs in the chat, and can you see?
Sorry. Okay, yes, I pushed the wrong button. I do apologize, but now we can see your browser. Yeah.
Okay, cool. You're like sharing my home camera somewhere. No, just kidding. So it's cool news. I was excited about it. There were a lot of tweets. I think a lot of the kind of the cloud native community at large was excited about this news. But, you know, I mean, maybe if there's somebody joining us from the Syft project and they want to come stream with us at some point, that would be really awesome. I'd love to hear more from them. But yeah, I just figured I'd been generating a lot of these. So the Syft project, you know, you can find it online. Like I said, it's, you know, from this company, Anchor. And, you know, it's been available for a long time as a container and as a downloadable software. But the sort of news out of Docker is now that you can do Docker space SBOM to generate an SBOM from any of your containers. And so it sort of brings up this question of like, well, what is an SBOM and why you would use one? You know, you know, if you know, a couple things to know about SBOMs are, one, that they've been mandated by the federal government for any federal software. So the government is really pushing on the need for SBOM. They're not necessarily saying you need a Syft one or you need one created by this company or this company. Right. They're just saying if you're going to ship software to the federal government, you need to provide a software bill of materials which lists, think of it as the nutrition facts behind you know, your containers or whatever open source you're using. It's just a list of all of the libraries and dependencies, how they interact together, and you know, like the versions that you have and stuff like that. We'll dive into what they actually look like here.
Right. And this is also guidance that the Cloud Native Computing Foundation have put out through various white papers as well, that this is a critical component of sort of container best practice.
Yeah, and there's some people that have been pushing for this for a while, both at the CNCF and in other areas. You know, there's a developer guy on Twitter, you know, who's been pretty vocal about this. A few other people on Twitter who have been very vocal about the need for SBOM. So it's taking hold as an industry. But I think if you've seen any of the like there's been congressional hearings on cybersecurity recently, and you know, leaders from Cisco and you know, kind of open source leaders, people from the CNCF talking about how SBOMs are really sort of a first step. You know, it's sort of like brass tie, like know what's in your containers. We've been saying that that's important for a long time. SBOMs are one way of knowing that. And, you know, it's good because they're all in sort of a JSON format, and you can kind of, you know, automate them, store them in databases and stuff like that, store them in different areas. You can sign them and put them in your containers. these kinds of things. There's a lot of other applications and use cases for them, but really the idea here is when something like Log4j happens, right? Where do you have Log4j running? Well, hopefully the SBOM creates sort of a list of that. They have some shortcomings. I don't want to get into those here because it'll be like a little bit of a debate, or we can have that debate in Discord or on Twitter about what are SBOMs good for, what are they bad for. I think John's article highlights some of the what's next for knowing what's in your containers, and we have some thoughts on that. But yeah, it's a good thing to create, and with this being available in the Docker tool, I think it's only going to get better. And we've been using these SBOMs. I'll say Syft is a good tool. So when we talked about our container report back at KubeCon last year, and we've been continuously updating this data set of the top 100 public containers, and we'll have sort of more to share on that at some conferences coming up. Syft was one of the tools that we used in addition to DockerSlim and some security vulnerability scanning tools to generate some of the data that we looked at in this container report. And specifically, something that an SBOM can tell you is like, okay, well, what are the licenses that are in your container? So that's a pretty important use case, right? So, you can see here that depending on the type of container that you have, there's a pretty wide spread of the types of licenses that you might have in a container. Now, hopefully they're all good open source licenses that are supported by the Open Source Initiative and all of these types of places, right? But, as a compliance person, or, if you work on the legal side, you might look at this and be like, oh, geez, 50 licenses, what are all of them, and how do they map to certain pieces of software?
And
so that's an important use case.
This is something that I've, grappled with firsthand. In a past role, I used to work with vendors who were shipping their applications for Linux, but also for the major platforms, Windows and Mac OS. And they had very clear guidelines from their sort of legal framework as to what licenses they could, what software they could use based on the licenses that they were under. And I can remember sitting in rooms, I'm not going to mention the names of the companies, but sitting in rooms with significant software vendors, figuring out an alternative library that had similar stroke the same functionality that was distributed under a license that was compatible with their corporate policies. Now, this is something you want to find out early in your development cycle, not when you're days away from shipping a new product, which is the situation I on myself
right. right well, and I think it's definitely one of the core issues. I think it's why people like Kate Stewart at the CNCF have been pushing really hard for SBOMs. And I should say about SBOMs, there are actually like two different standards of SBOMs, Cyclone and DX and SPDX or SPDX. So there is still some, it's like that. There's an XKCD comic for that, right? It's like we had 14 standards, and now we've come up with a better standard, and now we have 15 standards. I don't think SBOMs are quite there. I think there are kind of two main ones that people use, and I think actually Syft actually exports both formats, but they're all machine readable too, which is a nice component of them. I think one of the things that we've noticed with SBOMs in general is they tend to be really, really large. And I don't know if Aisha is on, but I know that she's been looking into sort of what's like the average size of an SBOM file. And if you think of them, they're like JSON files, but they run into the megabytes of text data. So they're a lot, right? And so it's good that they're machine readable, so you can kind of understand them. But I think they also if we're talking about sort of downsides of them, they can be a little hard to access, hard to understand from a, like a human communication standpoint.
Right. And this report that you're looking at now was predominantly prepared by Aisha, and Eric says, that he finds this report fantastic. He says there's a bunch of nuggets in this report that he didn't expect on the size and permissions used in these containers. And I agree. This container report has been fascinating. Well, I think for anyone that reads it, you probably got your own takeaway, a thing that stands out to you. And I think maybe this graph actually highlights one of mine. the big bit in the middle, the local development. There's an in-depth piece in this report about dev tooling that exists inside production containers and the kind of attack surface that subsequently exposes, because that dev tooling doesn't seem to get pushed along, with each new revision. And it's responsible for quite a lot of the exposure that exists in production containers. And that was my big takeaway from this, that I was really startled by how much unnecessary stuff gets shipped to production.
Right. Well, or could get shipped to production, right? Because these are sort of like the public containers, and so in some cases you need that tooling. I know, and we'll look at. I know we've been talking a lot internally about sort of shells in your container, and when should you have them? Not should you have them? When should you have them? Right? Because those can be exploited. We've seen tons of conference talks about using shells for container escape type situations. But our growth team was doing a little kind of hack session, and we were, using shells in a container, right? How do you teach people how to use containers if you can't shell into them, and understand what's inside of them? So, it is that sort of balance between developer productivity and security that is tough. Yeah. But so, kind of getting back to sort of SBOMs versus DockerSlim XRAYS. So in this report, we used the Syft SBOM to understand how many packages were in sort of your typical public container. And you're right. It's pretty complex, right? Up to 1,000 packages. How do you sort of understand that? And then, DockerSlim, the XRAY tool. So to kind of compare and contrast that, it's more focused on sort of the container's composition itself, and we'll dive into very, very specific examples here in a minute. But so when you see things like the special permissions, or we're talking about some of the attack surface things, or the way the container is constructed on a layer by layer basis, that's XRAY's goal is not to generate an SBOM, and it is not an SBOM tool, but it's kind of can be complementary, or sort of a slightly different use case, which is if you have files that have special permissions in your containers, those are things you want to be aware of. If you have things like shells, if you have things like, what's the container running at in terms of root access and stuff like that. Those are the types of things that we were using DockerSlim for in this analysis. And we can jump into that in a minute. So,
a couple of weeks ago, I had Evan on. He was talking about sort of the developer experience of working on creating the Slim.AI Docker desktop extension. And one of the things that cropped up there is he found the ability to use XRAY and look at the other Docker desktop extensions to see how other developers were shipping and packaging their software to be extremely insightful and useful, because he said there's no reference material for working on this platform other than the other people that are currently working on this platform, all behind closed doors. And he's like, this was a really useful
Yeah, and I think that it gets to the learning piece for me, right? We work with DockerSlim and XRAY quite a lot. It drives a lot of the analysis that's available in the Slim.AI platform. I'm learning more about SBOMs, and I would love more input and feedback. So if there are people in chat that use SBOMs, I would love to hear how you're using them and what use cases they're good for and stuff like that. I put this out on Twitter the other day. I didn't get a lot of feedback other than kind of a joke from Robert Caffey, but about what are people doing with these after they generate them? I've been generating tons of these, and they're just kind of sitting in local files on my local desktop. I'm sure that's not what developers do with them, but I'm kind of curious, how far are we into the kind of adoption curve and implementation curve of using these types of analysis tools? And so that's kind of an open question for me. I've been sort of shoving them into a Mongo database so that I can do some analysis on them after they're done.
Nice.
There's got to be a better use case. And Eric, if you want access to that database, I will happily provide it, and we can get some more analysis out of it. But so it's interesting. I think we're just sort of at the tip of the iceberg about how people are going to use this. I know Anchor, who supports the Syft project, has a lot of cool kind of tooling around it, but wondering what else is sort of out there. So. But let's dive in, specifically. So what I did was, and this is kind of a quick take on it. I'm going to try, like I said, this little bit of a YOLO stream. I'm going to try to get into kind of how you would actually generate these if we have time for it. But I don't know that it's like the most interesting thing. Oops, sorry.
And like I say, we do have a video where we go over that in some detail that I could share in our Discord a little, well, after this stream, in fact. And if anyone's got any follow-on questions, we can field them there.
Yeah, and I think if you
or if you've got questions now.
Yeah, feel free. I am going to just see if I can just scroll to the very top of this. Because as you saw, we were at about like line 161,000 there, and this is just one big JSON file. So this is, we're actually looking at the Syft output of Python latest. I generated this one a little while ago. I've just had this one sort of sitting around, so it might be a little out of date. So apologies to anybody if it looks a little out of date. But as you can see, it's just like big, kind of JSON blob key file with a bunch of interesting information in it. Things about kind of the different layer IDs and locations and just a ton of different metadata. So again, we're looking at, this is the Syft output. If you output the SBOM into a JSON format, this is what you'll get. To like read through it, and we've looked at DockerSlim XRAY a number of times on the stream. Reading through a DockerSlim XRAY is like not the world's most fun thing to do, and same for an SBOM report.
Right.
They're meant to be machine readable, right? So this use case that we're doing is like not super interesting. My Mongo database would probably be cool to look at from an aggregated point of view, but right. So we're in Python, right? Let's like find something interesting, right? What's interesting in Python? Pip's always interesting in Python, right? So here we see an actual package that we're kind of managing, or that's in our container, right? We expect this dependency to be in the container.
Right.
And now we're getting the version, it gives information about where it was found by, and it gives some information about the, kind of where does this live? Well, obviously in Python, this is going to live in site packages and, a bunch of other information kind of down the line. I won't pretend to know what all of this stuff is, but, we know that this is being provided by PyPy. We can see the license is MIT. We even get some information about the author email and different kind of cool things about Pip.
Yeah. So when you run Syft, one of the interesting things is you get like a summary report based on all of this data, and one of the things it will tell you is like how many of how much of the software in your container came from that Linux vendor's software repositories, Deb or RPM, for example.
Yep.
How much of it came from NPM via, no NPM installation, how much of it came from Ruby gems, how much of it came from Python packages installed with pip. And this is the complexity of the software ecosystem. We now have, for want of a better description, these multiple disparate app stores of software that get sucked in from all over the internet, and we really don't know the provenance of much of it at all, and that's what SBOM analysis can tell us.
Yeah, and again, it's more the listing of, and I think like you mentioned provenance, and obviously like signing is a big topic these days, and I can't speak to that, with any kind of authority. So, I'll leave that for other people, but certainly this is like, this is the start, right? Like, the nutrition label. Now the question becomes sort of like, well, what like should be in it, and like, do we need all of these things? Are these all important? Like a listing is one thing, but, sort of, where do the action items come from? I think that's like where a lot of the conversation in the industry is today. And I think that'll, breed some new tools that I think will be really interesting for us. So I was just going to look up one other one here just real quick, because we were kind of going through the random library earlier today as we were doing a little, kind of growth interest in, we were learning Python today on the growth team. So that was like one of the things that we were doing. And we were talking about the random library, and I was just curious if it's in here. So there's better ways to do this. Like I've written scripts that kind of go through to find things like Log4j, and there's obviously a lot of great tools out there that can do this for you automatically. But I think it's kind of cool, like when you say like, okay, now you can generate an SBOM using Docker. Like, why? What do I do with this? And it's meant to be a record of what you had in your infrastructure before, right?
Right.
So we talked a little bit about shells, and we were just kind of like looking at this, right? So one of the things that's kind of interesting, we asked a question about like how many shells are in like in the average public container. And obviously we're using some data we have to inform that decision, right? But
Yeah.
if we look up like bash or shells, maybe somebody can tell me like kind of a better way to do this. Here we have
do bin sh, for example. That should find
right
some. We'll use a bin. Oh, it's not. I'm surprised it's not there. There we go.
Okay. So we get some information about this. Again, it's kind of like listed as a package, right? And so we have this information. It's an artifact. I would have to trace through the kind of JSON, hierarchy to do that. And I'm just doing that now just to compare it to sort of like the way DockerSlim XRAYS. So here I'm looking at the
in fact, there, if you just scroll down a touch, that's an interesting, right there is an interesting example, because there we can see two shells. Most people think they're the same, but they're actually not. So if you just scroll up a little bit, you can see the Bourne shell, SH, the original Bourne shell, but it's not the Bourne shell in Debian and Ubuntu. It's actually a link to the Dash shell, which is like a minimized shell from the Debian project. So you see, there's actually two shells by default in Debian and Ubuntu, and that's even before you start lumping in a whole bunch of container software, which can sometimes pull in, TCSH and Tickle and all of these other things.
That's what somebody in our comments said that. Yeah, okay, interesting. So we might have to revisit our answer to this. I had not caught that Dash shell was. I was thinking Bourne and Dash were slightly separate. I guess in this case they're different files, but so it's interesting. So, like DockerSlim XRAYS really, really focused on sort of the composition of the container itself, so rather than providing a list of libraries, which it does in a certain use case, but again, not in a SBOM standard format. So DockerSlim XRAYS is not a replacement for an SBOM. It's an addition to or a separate type of analysis that you might do. But here you can see you're getting a lot of sort of distro information about the container itself, including, kind of digests and all that kind of stuff. But you're also getting sort of these, what Kyle calls the attack surface, or the, sort of what's presenting out of the container that might potentially be exploited at some point. So I just got through the container security book by Liz Rice. I did a book club on the Raw Code Discord channel, which was really fun. And we were talking about, like, it put a lot of these things into context for me about how these things can be exploited and why set IDs and get IDs are important, and really like how shells can be used for, different types of container exploits. So, so it's a little different. I haven't done the reverse thing of what we had talked about before, which was to kind of search for pip in the DockerSlim XRAY. Here it's in kind of an environment file, an environment variable, which you'll find in DockerSlim, along with some, like DockerSlim's really, XRAY is really all about how is the container constructed and what's the composition of it. So you don't find as much sort of like lists of packages in DockerSlim, though you do find that sometimes in the layer descriptions.
Right.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting to sort of see the differences between these two. I know when Log4j happened, I was sort of looking at whatever containers we had analyzed and looking for Log4j in both, kind of Syft, SBOMs, DockerSlim XRAY, and sort of the vulnerability reports that we had looked at. We used Gripe and Trivy and Snick, and it was just interesting that they all sort of gave sort of slightly different interpretations, whether it was, this is a dependency attack from Log4j, or this is Log4j in a layer somewhere, or this is, just a listing of Log4j being there. So
yeah, I did a similar sort of investigation last year. One of the cryptographic libraries had a vulnerability that was pretty serious. In that, it could weaken, the key generation and various other things in that sort of, the keychain handling. And when I went and looked, I found like the big Linux vendors like Red Hat and Canonical had patched that ahead of the sort of the embargo, and the fixes for these vulnerabilities were already out in the wild at the time that it was announced. and then tracking that through some of the smaller, more community-orientated distributions, you saw sort of a long tail of catch-up, and in some cases just well, we're not going to fix that in the past versions of our operating systems. You can only get that in our unstable branch. You can only get those fixes in the unstable branch. And it's kind of enlightening as to, you may know that a vulnerability with a CVE ID has been fixed, but actually you may find out that the base that you're building your container on doesn't include those fixes at all.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of different wrinkles there when you go hunting for different vulnerabilities and how to fix them. And when you start pulling on those threads, things can, it's just a complicated world. So cool. I think that's mostly what I was going to share. I was going to just kind of close it off by saying, if you want to try this yourself, and I haven't actually tried this yet because I had to reinstall Docker in order to make this happen. I had to get the update, but this is my first time doing it, so we'll see what happens. I think I probably should have put in an output variable here to tell it to go to JSON, but I think this might just print it to my terminal, and we'll see what happens. So this is pretty similar to using Syft locally or as a container. So I'm guessing that they're probably just running the Syft container in the background here. And so now it's like pulling Python latest, and then it's like doing its Syft stuff there, and then it gives, okay, cool. It gives kind of like a cool output of this is sort of a more human readable version of all of the libraries and packages. But, and again, Python latest, like 900 megabyte image. If we were to slim Python latest, or even if we did, let's actually do this. This would be kind of cool to see. This isn't the DockerSlim version of Python, but this is the Python community's version of the Slim container.
Yeah.
And we can see, there's just significantly fewer
packages
in it, right?
Yeah.
Similarly, if we were to do, kind of DockerSlim, XRAY, Python latest, it would give us some information and some output information. But it runs really, really, it takes a little bit to run, and then if we do the Docker, we do the same for Python Slim, it's it's pretty quick. So because the image is considerably smaller. So
indeed.
So that's kind of what I got. I'll stop sharing and we can jump over and close out. I don't know if people have questions or if there's comments. I'm not sure how much people have played around with SBOMs and X-ray reports and that kind of stuff, but I thought it was pretty fun and interesting, and it was just cool to see kind of Docker and Anchor working together to do some open source collaboration, which is really always awesome to see.
So Eric says there are many opportunities to mine the data that we've surfaced here. Yes, I think so. And Eric, if you're interested in doing some work on how to present that data, we can definitely collaborate on that. Maybe you and I can have a chat in Discord, because I was thinking along similar lines. Also, I was thinking, pushing some of this data into charts and graphs to sort of, if you want to actually manage your your SBOM and your CVE exposure, you probably want to track that over time through time series graphs and things of that nature. So I was also thinking about how you could present this data in different ways. So if you're up for a bit of poking around, let me know.
Definitely.
I also shared a link to the video we did with CNCF in the Twitch chat here. I will make sure that we include links to these various videos we've referenced in the description of the YouTube version of this that goes up, and after this stream I'll put some links in our Discord, so for those of you that are interested in going off and seeing some of the other places where we've discussed things like this in the past, then you'll have links to that.
Cool.
And Eric saying, yes, this is exactly the batch of ideas I was thinking of. So I think we've got some common ground here then, Eric. We can totally take a look at that. I'll be in touch.
I'm excited for these tools that kind of generate data. I think we started with DockerSlim XRAY to kind of understand container composition and sort of do some data analysis on that, and that was where I started with that. And we said, okay, well, here are some other tools that are out there. Obviously SNCC is a vulnerability scanner that we've used a bunch in the past, and Anchor has one that's called Gripe that's also very good, and Aquasec has their Tribby,
Yeah.
which is, kind of that's sort of an old standard. So those vulnerability scanning tools are, they produce some interesting information that sometimes developers love, sometimes they hate, but
there are definitely plenty of there are enough tools to generate useful data. There's a lack of insight into the data that's collecting. I mean, the follow-on from this is great.
Yeah.
I can generate SBOMs and vulnerability analysis reports, but now what do I do with them now?
Yeah.
How do I store them? How do I interrogate them? How do I turn it into something a useful metric?
Exactly right. And I think that's like where the excitement in the industry is. I was saying, like, if you watched any of those congressional hearings and stuff like that, you could just hear people saying, like, it's so great we're getting to this point, but this is just the beginning of kind of knowing what's in your container, creating secure containers, using that to sort of reduce the complexity in your supply chain and understand it better. And hopefully all of that will just get us into a better, safer place in the future. So.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for raising that topic. I think this is a fun one. I think we'll definitely be circling back to this in different ways, not least because I'm definitely interested in actually trying to visualize some of this data, turn it into something digestible. And I think we'll be back next Thursday. And I think you talked about John, our CEO, and his 3 S's. I think tentatively we're hoping that he may be able to join us.
I think that will be in 2 weeks.
Oh, that's in 2 weeks.
I believe
okay.
John has some holiday time coming up. So I believe in 2 weeks we'll be doing that. So I think you'll be stuck with me again next week. Unless we have a guest, unless Big Pod wants to come on and show off some of the awesome examples. I know he's been working on some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So maybe he'll come on and help you out. Otherwise we can kind of get back to sort of DevOps 101 maybe or something like that. But I think John will be on in 2 weeks to do sort of the 3 S's and talk about that in a little more depth. And then we'll be coming right up on KubeCon, or not KubeCon,
DockerCon.
DockerCon. And we'll have a lot of exciting stuff going on for DockerCon, so definitely mark the calendars for that.
Yeah, and you can get a sneak peek at what some of that's going to be. I did a stream with Evan a couple of weeks ago. You can find the VOD here. And yeah, we're part of the Docker partner program for Docker desktop extensions. And we even got, aside from sort of an interview with a developer about working on a brand new technology, we got some, Evan gave us some show and tell as to what our extension currently does and hinted at what it may do by the time DockerCon comes around. So you can go and get some spoilers over there.
Yeah, there we go. The cliffhanger. I love it. So. All right. Well, awesome. Well, I will be back home next week, so in the very least, I'll be in a regular background with my, usual setup.
I may be in the lodge next week. I think that might be happening. Right then. Well, thanks very much, Pete. I look forward to speaking to you after the little holiday break.
Okay. Awesome. Sounds good, Martin. We will see you soon. Thanks, everybody.
Bye for now. Thanks for coming, everyone.
All right.